Okay, hello everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar about sacred grounds. We're so excited to have you join us, learn more about this wonderful program from the National Wildlife Federation. My name is Sarah Helson, and I am the program coordinator for Detroit Audubon, an organization dedicated to fostering the appreciation and conservation of birds and the environment we share. We could not do the work we do without our funders and members and partners, so I wanted to thank those of you who are members and supporting projects. Some quick Zoom housekeeping before I introduce our speaker for today. You are able to control your video and microphone in the bottom left of your screen. So we ask that you keep yourself muted so we don't receive feedback from your microphones. You can open the chat box by clicking on the chat button on the bottom of your screen. We'll have time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please add any questions you might have into the chat. Noah, our office administrator, will be keeping up with our presentation through closed captioning. So if you need, please click on subtitles on the bottom and they will open right up. If you have any further questions, please reach out to me and I'll do my best to assist you. And now I wanted to introduce Tiffany Carey, Habitat and Education Coordinator for National Wildlife Federation, or NWF. Tiffany was raised in Detroit and pursued ecological research as an undergraduate at U of M, leading her to a career incorporating urban ecology, education, and community involvement. Today, she'll be introducing us to the Sacred Grounds Program from NWF, a program aiming to connect faith-based communities with environmental stewardship, discussions, and projects. Thank you, and welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And so great to have everybody online today. Good afternoon, happy lunch, happy noon, and happy summer. So I will get started and let's see if this works. Okay, so a little bit of intro. So the National Wildlife Sacred Grounds Program is what I'm going to be talking about today. And essentially it aims to build healthy habitats and communities in the Great Lakes region. Like Sarah said, my name is Tiffany Carey and I am the Habitat Education Coordinator, and I serve out of the Great Lakes Regional Office in Ann Arbor. So before we get started, actually, I'm going to have Sarah give a poll engagement question for everyone just to gauge where you are with National Wildlife Federation. Do you know anything about the National Wildlife Federation? Yes or no? Very curious. That's so cool. Okay, so 67% of you have said, well, 10 of you have said, 11 have said yes, and no, 5 folks. So it seems like the majority of the room knows a little bit about what we do based on your experience. So let me get started. So essentially, National Wildlife Federation, our mission is to unite all Americans, ensuring wildlife is thriving in a rapidly changing world. So we do that in various ways. So we protect and restore and connect wildlife habitat, we do advocacy work, and we also connect kids and adults with wildlife and nature as well. We have 8 regional centers, and the Great Lakes Regional Center is one of them, all across the country. And we represent all of our states as well as our affiliate work across the country. So this is a little bit of a representation of where we are geographically. Our awesome team of about 28-ish, I think we're always growing in the picture that you see here. And we work on 5 program areas around water, restoration, education and habitat, wildlife, and climate resiliency. And a little bit of our mission, and I know this is kind of cut off a little bit, but the Great Lakes Regional Center strategy is to be a leader in the regional conservation effort by leveraging diverse communities, relationships, and institutional knowledge in order to promote sound evidence-based programming and policies, ultimately strengthening and preserving the wild and human environment in our region. You guys can see this, sorry for all the clicking. So this is our team of 3, and also Mustafa Ali, who's our Vice President of Equity and Justice on our national staff, but myself, Tiffany Carey, is the Habitat Education Coordinator. We have Antonio Cosme, who's our Detroit Education Coordinator, as well as Manya Holland, who is our Habitat Education Manager. So our work, particularly around habitat education, is working to support healthy habitats and communities and inspiring the next generation of conservation leaders and stewards. So a little bit of a higher up level around why our work is important and why the wildlife and human connection needs to be intersected is, our biodiverse and ecosystem services across our world due to industrialization, due to mass agriculture, urbanization, all these things across decades. Really, these services are really important because they support oxygen. Biodiversity cleans our waters, it buffers our extreme weather events, pollinates our crops, and provides emotional and mental healing for us. In the recent decades, we know that, or we don't know, or if you know, over 3,000 plants have invaded nearly 200 million acres in the United States, called invasives. 2.9 billion birds have gone since 1970. We are also nearing 366 million people in the US with 40 million acres and lawns. And also in our Midwest community, species have disappeared for their historic ranges in the last 100 years. We also know that there's a nature deficit issue around our youth. And now that folks, especially during the state of COVID, and where we're spending a lot more time inside, which is safe, we also know that we have to still find ways to reconnect with nature, and that nature deficit with digital work, digital gaming and being on the computer is leading to more of a lost connection between youth and the environment and our outdoor play. So really the top few things that our work really hones in on is habitat loss, nature deficit, climate change, and our aging infrastructure. So what does that mean? We really think that from a large scale perspective, we can restore hundreds and thousands of acres and reach masses of people, but we know that that has to happen by reaching one person at a time, one garden at a time. And small scale native plant habitat can really make a difference, whether you live in New York City, Detroit, Milwaukee, Colorado, Northern California, wherever, that anything that you're able to do really matters in the larger grand scheme of the conservation movement. So why native plants? And I'm so Sarah, I am no expert of native plants. I'm still learning myself. I still have a garden outside that's extremely shady and very dry. So I'm always figuring out what plants to even plant in my own garden. But we know that in our work and our programmatic materials that we really encourage native plants because they do all of these different properties, right? So they build resilient communities. They improve our water quality. They improve our soil health. They increase pollinator habitat. For our birds and pollinators and our bees and butterflies. They also are beautiful. Native plants are not always a nuisance as some people may perceive them to be, but if designed and maintained in the way that you need to for your garden, they can be very beautiful and they can have seasonal benefits all year round. They reduce local flooding. They improve quality of life, wellness, and mental health. And they provide opportunities for people to connect with nature. So that's kind of not the triple bottom line, but the multiple benefits of why native plants are important and really why that's the source of how we even talk about our work in Detroit and the Great Lakes region and beyond. So we also know that native plants are not just in those benefits, but also contribute to our population of our bee species. So these are our bee friends, I always say, in a sense of our bumbus that is coming out of a lot in our neighborhood, as well as a large range of native bees that are in the Midwest and other regions of our country. Also, we know the monarch story and how milkweed is very essential for making sure that they have their full cycle of being able to support them with life, as well as their food, and also thriving past their peak time of survival. So this is really essential for all gardens and making sure to plant these as well as native milkweed in your area. So before I get to this, I'm going to have Sarah shoot another engagement poll question before I talk a little bit about sacred grounds. Do you already have a garden at your residence and or house of worship? Yes, 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 yes. A lot of 5, 6 people, 8 people, 14, 15. I'll wait a couple more minutes, 17. Wow, so everyone has already has a native plant garden, which is awesome. I'm glad I'm preaching to a little bit of the choir here. So I will end polling. So 20 folks have said yes on the poll. Great, so let me talk a little bit about our Sacred Grounds program. And this is one of many different programs that we have out of the Great Lakes Regional Center. And I'm not going to get into the other ones too much in depth, but I will mention the Detroit Leadership and Environmental Education Program, led by our education coordinator, Antonio Cosme, who actually activates or supports high school students in Detroit around leadership opportunities, field trips, and connecting ecological stewardship to environmental justice and education and leadership. So that is a program that is happening in Detroit as well. So if you're interested in that program, I'll be more than happy to talk about that offline, but just wanted to mention that is one of our 2 programs that we're leading out of their habitat education team in our regional center. But our Sacred Grounds program is essentially recognizing congregations, houses of worship, faith communities, faith entities who both create wildlife habitat and actively link this idea of faith practices and caring for the environment. So I sent a video in the chat, and the sound is a little bit iffy. I don't want to play it on this platform, but I'm going to take 5 minutes for you all to click this link in your chat. It should be coming up. Sarah's like sending it. So I'm going to stop our presentation for 5 minutes so you all can click the link and watch this short video around Sacred Grounds. Thumbs up if that can happen, or at least if you're able to do that. Does everyone see the link?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes. See you in 5 minutes, everyone. Okay, my computer says 12:18. So let's reconvene back. And I thought that this was a great chance for everyone to kind of get a little bit of a taste of the testimonials, as well as the stories of why people really came to be motivated with the Sacred Grounds program across our region, both highlighting Toledo and Detroit. So taking a little bit step back, not only the mission, but faith leaders are so important to this conservation movement and doing this work. So as respected community leaders and some of the largest landowners actually in the country, houses of worship, congregations, faith entities can serve as vital community anchors for disseminating native plants, rain gardens, and other best management practices, not only on site, but in their surrounding community. So the Sacred Grounds Program key elements is to educate and engage the congregation, connect faith and environmental stewardship, as well as create a native plant habitat at the house of worship and connect these practices into the greater community. So not only the wildlife narrative of just creating these habitats, but extending this education and extending it to the broader network within their area. So as of now, we're actually in 3 cities. We're in Toledo, Grand Rapids, and Detroit. So our Toledo houses of worship, there'll be 20 houses of worship by the end of 2020, 8 residences that have actually created native plant habitat by the end of 2020. In Grand Rapids, we have a partner with Plaster Creek Stewards, 20 houses at the end of 2021 with 120 residences, and even in COVID. So this is actually happening in a pandemic where people are outside doing this work and are so excited to get their hands dirty in the soil, still being able to create these gardens. And in Detroit, we have a total of, the numbers of 22 houses of worship by 2021 and 75 residences creating their native plant habitat at their homes by the end of 2020. So to step back a little bit, and specifically with Detroit, and that's the work that Manya Holland leads, the Grand Rapids work, as well as Toledo, and my work is focusing on Detroit. A lot of examples of systemic and social environmental challenges and why people are not only motivated to do this work, but why this work is urgent, why this is vital for creating resilient communities. So a lot of issues, or at least challenges, have been since 2016 around houses of worship having stormwater utility fees. Given the impervious surfaces, especially with their parking lots and roofs, that obviously raises up their water utility fees and how much they have to pay to manage that, stormwater into the combined sewer system. So that has really hit House of Worship hard, given the amount of impervious surfaces that they have. So creating green stormwater infrastructure projects, creating rain gardens is not just for habitat, but it actually can reduce stormwater and rain water fees and utility fees. Also the perception and buy-in to native plant gardens. I've heard a lot of, especially with feedback around, well, native plants look just like the unused lot next door to me. How do I design or incorporate this type of plant into my landscape for it to still be beautiful and perceived by my neighbors to be something that's good for not only wildlife, but also an asset to my community. So changing the paradigm shift and changing the way that we perceive native plants to be a part of the urban context is also not only a challenge, but an opportunity to really encourage folks to get into this, to this space. Also, initial and continued funding sources. A lot of the green stormwater infrastructure projects, as many of you may know, is there could be thousands of dollars, $20,000 to get these big bioswales or big rain gardens with excavation, all that stuff. And so having that initial and also continued education, continued funding is also a huge challenge with houses of worship in Detroit. We also know that when we're talking about water health, when we're talking about water access, we're talking about combined stormwater infrastructure issues, this all has to do with environmental justice and making sure that Black communities, brown communities, and underrepresented communities are at the forefront of having these projects in their communities, but also having the support and the continued funding with the city, as well as nonprofits like National Wildlife Federation, to be at the forefront of advocating for these issues. So before I got into the program, I wanted to really kind of take a step back and look at the different systemic things that not only motivate people to do this work, but also some of the barriers that we also have to face with programmatic implementation. So to get to motivating factors, and this has been a kind of a survey across all of our 3 sites, people are looking to find ways to connect with nature in different ways. They're building resilient communities and finding ways to bring people to green spaces, not just for the ecological benefits, but for mental, emotional, psychological. There's this awesome connection between faith and earth stewardship, and how there are regardless of scripture, regardless of faith texts, that there are so many instances where creation care or stewarding the earth is very much tied to faith and religious communities. And also increasing wildlife habitat in communities as well, and creating safe and peaceful green spaces for prayer and reflection. Not that has to be done always inside the church walls, or the congregation or faith walls, but having that extend outward into the community where you're also having all of these benefits and creating a place for people to come and be connected with other people and wildlife. So a little bit of the elements of how to get started with the Sacred Grounds program. And I want to be clear that in our Great Lakes region, Center, we're in 3 cities, and that is where we do our mini grant program, where we offer houses of worship funding, as well as very in-depth technical support, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But the Sacred Grounds program is also open nationally to any houses of worship that want to get started with this work. They do not receive, every city in America does not receive the funding or the technical assistance or that guided support day in and day out, but they do have access to this kind of certification program if you're a house of worship, faith entity, congregation, sacred space that wants to do native plant garden and education on your site. So to get started, there's a step 1 of registering, and that website I'll throw into the chat so you all can get a little bit of a feel of the website. Step 2 is it's creating the wildlife habitat, but also completing some additional activities, which I'll go into the next slide, as well as lastly, creating a maintenance plan for your habitat. So we all know that if you all are gardeners, it seems like, so it's not just about installing, but making sure you know what a weed versus a native plant is, and that maintenance, that 3 to 4 year maintenance plan before these plants get established, that is really vital for the success of the project. And also the step 3 is completing the action form, and then you receive a certification, which is not only a certificate, but also a Sacred Grounds certification wildlife sign. So that is the process of the program. So to get into a little bit of the action areas that I mentioned in the last slide. So connecting faith and earth stewardship, this can be embodied in so many different ways, and depending on what congregation you're in, this may be faith leaders speaking at the pulpit, talking about how to restore habitat and the connection with faith teaching on stewardship. Some folks have done religious educational programs with youth or with their adults in their group to educate about why wildlife habitat stewardship is important for not only our physical health, but mental health and spiritual health. So those are some examples, but really we want people to embody these action areas in whatever way that makes sense. We're only listing a few things that people have done or ways that we know, but this is a chance for your particular site to think about how can that be amplified and leveraged within the already existing fabric of what you're doing at the congregation or at your site. Action 2 is engaging the congregation. So this may be writing an article about the habitat work for congregations newsletter. I don't know if there's a green newsletter or green team at your site. It can also mean hosting a workshop for your members and teaching how to create a wildlife habitat at their own home. So you're extending that, that breadth and that network, not from the site, but to the. And lastly, the action 3 is reaching beyond the congregation. So a lot of our sites have actually hosted community workshops where they're inviting people from the community to come in and learn about the project and learning about how to create wildlife habitat. Now, and we actually have one coming up in about a month. Our Toledo site is doing a virtual garden tour. I think they're doing some drones or some cool stuff where they're actually having a chance to look at different gardens around the city and showing that virtually, so people are able to stay safe, but also people are feeling inspired by different stages in which the wildlife habitat is being established, depending on how old it is and how far along each site is. So what I mentioned earlier around the number of sites of houses of worship that are being established in each city, but then I mentioned also the amount of folks who in their residence or homes are also establishing these native plant gardens. Again, extending the network, that these projects are not standalone projects, but they can be amazing places and chances for demonstration. So we have a workshop series called Bringing Nature Home, which provides workshops for homeowners or residents. We have one in Detroit coming up at the end of August to allow for folks to learn more about native plants, get that technical expertise online, virtually. And when they participate in the webinar, they're able to get a $50 plant voucher to their native plant nursery. So that activates folks to not just learn about the knowledge, but also get connected to a native plant nursery and also have the opportunity to have the funding to start something at home, which is sometimes the barrier as well. So within Detroit specifically, we're working with Keep Growing Detroit. That is one of the established farms out in Detroit proper. And they do some amazing cultivation of native plants, but also food. So we're going to be opening that up to about 75 residents in Detroit. So stay tuned or shoot me an email if you wanted more information. And with that, you're able to connect with the KGD, which Keep Growing Detroit's resource program, but also are able to get $50 to start your own garden at home, whether that's food or native plants. And we know that with native plants, that's obviously our kind of bread and butter and what we talk about a lot. But as folks are building resilient communities, and especially with our food sovereignty movement, we also want to make sure that we're making the connection that native plants and food are complementary, especially for pollinators. So depending on people's needs and the community's needs, that is something that we support on both sides, native plants and food. So we're working with that particular community and establishment of Keep Growing Detroit, as well as Detroit Future City as a partner to bringing nature home to residents in Detroit. So I will elaborate this a little bit more. So our staff engagement model, and this is the model, is that NWF staff, along with our local partners. In Detroit, we work with Detroit Collaborative Design Center, which is a design center out of the University of Detroit Mercy. In Toledo, we work with the local chapter Wild Ones, as well as Grand Rapids. We work with Plaster Creek Stewards, and they are the ones that are providing the project planning and technical expertise. And then we have these place-based specific incentives, again, plant vouchers, mini grants, and educational mechanisms such as workshops that we hold, as well as outreach support. And each site gets $1,500 for plants materials to do their installation. So it's this comprehensive program in the sense of these 3 sites. And again, we can't be everywhere. We're hoping to maybe launch in Cleveland soon, maybe Chicago, but really these 3 sites get an in-depth approach to this work with the staff support, as well as the monetary funding and this ongoing maintenance and technical support from our partners on the ground. So it's a really comprehensive, in-depth engagement for these 3 cities. So I want to just shout out some of the amazing projects that I've had a chance to work with, and I have both Detroit and Toledo, and this was actually in the video, so the folks who watched the video may remember or look at this Hope House example. And this is Meditation Missionary Baptist Church, led by the faith leader Glenn Hodges. And this house is going to be kind of a family home for folks in the community who are in transition with jobs or residents. And this is a place where I see kind of on the right side, you're seeing a lot of brush and vegetation, will be a place for a native plant garden, as well as a rain garden to capture some storm water. So this is an amazing team that's not only restoring this house for the community, again, building resilient communities, but also creating an aesthetic, beautification, native plant garden on the side to welcome folks in as they're transitioning in different places in their life. So I wanted to shout out this amazing church and this amazing leader, and actually Mike Duggins, who's also there in the picture, and the efforts that are going on in this community. People's Missionary Baptist Church is in Toledo, and they are, you all heard about their story as well, have this even Labyrinth is on the very site where a drug house was a few years ago, and how that over time was taken down and was a really unsafe place in the neighborhood, and now is being transformed to a prayer garden, a native plant garden, also some Wi-Fi hotspot. So in the midst of all that's happening in the world, youth and people are feeling safe to go and get some wireless and get some information if they don't have it at their home, but also a place of peace and joy. So this has been really one of the transformation stories of people who didn't know anything about native plants. I think they were putting the native plants in their basement, thinking that it was going to grow there or so they were coming at this work knowing not a lot about gardening, and now they are experts and are sharing this good work and sharing the good news outward. And this is one of the transformation stories that we highlighted a lot, and an amazing group of folks and an amazing community in Toledo. So Christ the King Church is also, they actually just installed their rain garden a couple of weeks ago. I was helping out with that, and they actually dug up their sidewalk. There's downspouts, if you can see on the corner of their church building, that was giving a lot of water that was rushing into the street and onto the sidewalk. They were able to remove the sidewalk and install this large rain garden project. And this past Sunday, they had a blessing, which again goes into our Action 2 area of engaging the congregation with this project and faith. So they were able to have a prayer ceremony and also bless their rain garden after installing it a couple weeks ago. So amazing leadership, amazing story. And in the midst of COVID, people who are still able to get out and doing the safe work and still being able to create habitat. So it was just a really awesome, inspiring story these last couple weeks to see them through this project. Glass City Church, and this has a little bit of the stormwater flood control story narrative. They were able to install a rain garden as well, and they had a sump pump that was running 24/7. Installing this rain garden, they were able to, well, they weren't using the sump pump as much, and they were able to save a credible amount of money on their water utility fees. So this is another story of a different angle of not just ecological, but how are we thinking about the economic, the social, and the health benefits, all a part of one particular site. So this was an amazing story. Again, another site of how they are motivated to do the project, but also the multi-benefits of installing a project like this. So I wanted to end with a little bit of how we frame our work, how we do our work, and how we envision our work around equity and justice, and really the way that we've approached this project or this program from our collateral with the way that we design the program, our partnerships, and even the long-term vision of how these wildlife habitats can really thrive, not only in our cities, but across the country, is creating authentic trust-based relationships that support and foster long-term collaborative solution-based solutions. Putting the needs and desires of the community first is vital, critical, and urgent. You know, I think even with the native plant narrative, as far as even how we talk about native plants, not being so maybe purist or thinking if you don't plant a native plant, then it's not, it's not right. And I think it is about developing that trust and that relational work to make sure that people are feeling comfortable with whatever they start off their garden to be. And that could be, again, that could be food, and food is not all native, but if that is the way that they get into the work, we should appreciate that and respect that. So part of this program, part of the relationship build, even especially around Detroit, is making sure that we have an exchange, we have that dialogue, and we center the community first before we start with our agenda and our checklist of how we do the work. And I just want to say, you know, working on the land, work with the land, for the land is healing and transformative work. It should be a right that everyone enjoys. So when we're talking about all people being able to have access to these benefits, we have to start with the systemic challenges and barriers, but also finding paths and solutions and avenues for people to work, enjoy, and heal with the land as well. And we must acknowledge also, even as a conservation movement, that our outdoor spaces have been historically governed and managed without equity at its center. So we are trailblazing and finding ways to continue fighting that particular historical narrative. And through our work, not just with the Sacred Grounds Program, but with Detroit Leadership Environmental Education Program and others, we aim to leverage this environmental stewardship through these dynamic natural spaces to bring people together, all people together on the ground from diverse races, faiths, socioeconomic backgrounds across the political spectrum around wildlife and conservation. So this is really, wildlife habitats, that's a project, but we really do help to leverage those projects to really aim at creating this just and equity work at its center. So these are a few other pictures. I just want to say stay tuned. And I'm going to have Sarah shoot up another question poll, and then I think I am done potentially. I don't know how many slides I have left. Sarah, you could do the next poll question. Awesome. So a lot of you want more information. Awesome. Great. Okay, I will open it up to questions. I think we have a good amount of time for that too. This has been so distracting, this little thing. Okay.
Okay, great. I have one question in the chat about grants, whether the grants are available just for Detroit or for the Metro Detroit area.
Yes, great question. So only available through Detroit right now within the Detroit city limits. Yeah, that's my straightforward answer. We are thinking about in the actually in a couple years, just thinking about this suburb city dynamic and thinking of ways to bridge that, especially with there's a lot of mosques and as well as synagogues in the surrounding area of Detroit. So there would be some awesome faith best practices exchanges and all that good stuff. So that is something on the horizon as far as funding, but also collaboration.
Great, thank you. Question is from Diane. She says, thank you, Tiffany. Do you know how many acres of habitat have been installed through the program in the city?
Good question. That's actually should be my homework. I do not know, but actually probably one of the questions or conversations we've had with Detroit Audubon too is thinking about how many projects are being done. That's probably a good GIS intern mapping exercise, because so many of these projects are happening all across the city. I am just focused cost of worship, but Detroit Audubon is obviously doing bird habitat work. We have all these other partners who are doing the work as well. So I would say that if you are interested in stormwater infrastructure projects, there is a GIS or stormwater hub map that actually blows all around GSI in Detroit. So that's actually being tracked, but these smaller native plant habitat, not so much. But that is my homework. And I feel like you've asked me that before. So it's definitely on my homework. Great to hear from you, Diane.
Another question, someone who wants to get started. So they're at Messiah Church in Southwest Detroit and wondering what their steps would be to get started.
Awesome. Well, you should definitely reach out to me. My last name is Carey, t@nwf.org. We just have our second cohorts just start actually in a couple of weeks. However, we may have an extra spot this upcoming year. So if that is of interest to you of getting started for planting season in the fall or the spring, definitely reach out to me and I'll provide you some more information. Actually in Southwest, we worked with Holy Redeemer Parish this past in cohort 1. So they just installed their native plant garden probably a year ago, but they have some more projects to do around the campus. So that is actually, we've already worked a little bit in that area, but would love to have you on board. That's exciting. Thank you.
Great. From Tom, he's asking who you work with at Detroit Water to reduce the stormwater fee.
Great question. So we work with Detroit Water and Sewage Department. We also work with Detroit Future City. The Nature Conservancy is the one that hosts the Stormwater Hub website that actually starts to, creating a community, I would say just the transparency with people in Detroit being able to see what's happening in the GSI world. So that's another key player in that work. Detroit Sierra Club, we work with a lot of Friends of the Rouge. We have an amazing new partnership, actually installing large-scale green stormwater infrastructure projects this upcoming fall and spring. And so stay tuned for that, which is kind of ramping up our work a little bit directly related to water utility fees, which has been one of the challenges, like I mentioned, with a lot of houses of worship, where like $1,500 doesn't give me these maybe effects to reduce my fees. So we're actually starting to hopefully tackle that intersection. So we're working with Friends of the Rouge as well as Sierra Club to install those larger scale projects. So those are the main players. Yeah, probably 5 or 6 organizations who are at the forefront of that.
Great. We had someone else ask about the program you mentioned in August, I believe, for homeowners to come and to watch the series and then get a voucher. Is there more information on that? And how is that open to others outside of those in the program? That kind of thing.
Yes, so it's offered to those outside of Sacred Grounds. It is only offered within Detroit residents, and we will be having a flyer in that promo coming out in the early August. So the webinar itself will be at late August, early September because of fall harvest and the cold crops. So stay tuned for that. Again, I just threw in my email. And so if you are interested as a resident to just start a garden and get $50, $60 worth of the voucher to get, whether it's food or native plants, this is an awesome time to do it. And we're partnered with KGD, Keep Growing Detroit, as well as Detroit Future City. And you'll get your plans as well as some information, kind of like a little box starter kit, if you will. And then you'll have the information from the webinar to get started with that.
Great. And I had a question. I wondered what kind of communication there was between houses of worship, like within Detroit or between the cities. Is there any kind of sister groups that are forming, or they're sharing? I know they're sharing information. Are they sharing with each other?
Yeah, good question. We designed the program to be cohort-ish, so meaning as we're, picking these houses of worship, they're not just feeling isolated to do these projects by themselves, but they do have this convening where, 5 or 7 houses of worship from different faiths, from different parts of the city are talking for the first time about these projects. And from there, obviously other things brew up. I know that there's some amazing partners that we have with Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and they do their own kind of programming. So we make sure to link them up with other faith efforts across the city. I would also say Moses, which is a community organizing organization around faith with like an underbelly framework of faith organizations as well. And Detroit 2030 is also an organization that really hones in on a particular strip of Detroit, but they work with a lot of houses of worship. So we make sure within our cohorts, we establish that cohort feel, but also as they're developing their own, because the project is, when it's done, what else happens after that? Making sure that they're connected with other, organizations and efforts across the city, both faith and gardening and environmental work. So that's the aim. But it's been cool. It's been really good question. It's been cool seeing even like some churches on the east side and the west side, coming together and talking about things, and even sharing tools and sharing like, hey, can we do like a joint community thing together and get this done at the same time because we're up the street. So it has been a really cool dynamic seeing how they interact with each other as a cohort.
Great, wonderful. We had a question over on Facebook actually from Project Learning Tree Maryland, wondering if the program was on the East Coast. And I know you mentioned where it was and where it's possibly expanding. So if you could say that again, maybe.
Great question. I apologize for not including this, but Baltimore also has Sacred Grounds. So this is being done in the Great Lakes Regional Center, but our Mid-Atlantic region. So Maryland actually lived in Baltimore for a while, but please reach out to the Mid-Atlantic National Wildlife Federation. Natalie Cohen is the person who's leading that work. And they are in Baltimore, Lancaster County, and a few other places in that DMV kind of area. So definitely. So if you are interested, definitely reach out to me and I can connect you, or reach out directly to the Mid-Atlantic office.
Great. Okay, we had another question from Marion. Is $1,500 usually enough to cover expenses, or do houses of worship hold fundraisers?
Good question. For these small scale projects, we're talking about 10 by 10. That does get people the mulch, the plants, and even the tool rental. For instance, with Christ the King Church, they had to remove the sidewalk, right? And if you're talking about something that's a bigger scale, I have told folks that if the $1,500 needs to just go towards a bigger pot of money for you to establish, to do something big, that's fine. This is not micromanaging of, maybe the $1,500 can't go to even food. If the food is providing the volunteers to come to do the projects, that's fine too. So in my experience, or at least with all the projects, given the scale, $1,500 is sufficient. And what we do is make sure that we talk about native plant sales that are coming up. We partner with some folks who are already establishing some shrubs and plants and making sure to get some discount in bulk. So that's the kind of way that we not only save money, but again, allow people to gauge how they want to use the money. If it's for pizza and making sure people get there for a barbecue, and while they're doing it, they're picking up a plant, that's a win. And if it's going directly towards a bigger project, like I said, excavating or getting something removed, that's okay too. So we know that $1,500 can be a big deal, but also maybe a complementary to something else as well. Hopefully that was helpful, Marion.
Well, wonderful. I think that's all the questions we have. I was checking Facebook again.
Awesome.
But we will be sending out an email to everybody that registered with all the links that we talked about, and possibly Tiffany's contact info, etc. So please look to that since you registered. And for those who maybe joined us late or missed it, we'll have a video of the presentation as well that we'll be sending out. So I just want to thank you so much, Tiffany, for joining us. I look forward to meeting you in person one day. Tiffany, great to have new partnerships, and so So we're really excited to see what else we can do with Detroit Audubon and this program in the future, or other NWF programming. So
Totally,
this has
totally.
been really wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed it as well. Detroit Audubon will have more webinars coming up. We don't have any set yet, but they will be on our website or our Facebook page or in our Flyway Express e-newsletter. If you need to join that, you can send me an email at programs@detroitaudubon.org. And otherwise, everyone have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll hang around a little bit longer if anyone has any questions that they wanted to ask more in person. Otherwise, have a great rest of your Tuesday, I believe. Yes, Tuesday. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cool. This is great. This is great. It's weird because I know I'm still on. It's okay. But
I'm just turning off Facebook.
The little bar kept popping up. I was like seeing the chat and seeing this, and I was like, okay. So I was trying to move things